Hi everyone, it's George Belleville here. I'm a realtor in Maryland, and I'm creating this video because I wanted to explain what happens on settlement day or closing day. There are different ways, different phrases people use for that, but that's basically the day when you go from being under contract to actually purchasing the home, and for the seller, selling the home and no longer owning it. We call it settlement, we call it closing. Some places call it going in escrow, but it's all the same thing. So I'm not going to get into the details of the actual closing statement. I'll do another video on that, but I just wanted to talk about the process. So what will happen just from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. So at the beginning of the day, at some point before closing, the buyers will do what's called a walkthrough, and I have another video about that, but that's their chance to look at the house, make sure it's the way it should be. Generally, when they go, the buyer's agent will do the walkthrough and they will take the key from out of the lockbox. So that way when the listing agent goes and recovers the lockbox, they're not left with an extra key to the house that they don't want to have responsibility for. So the buyer agent will take the key. They will let the listing agent know that everything was okay with the property. If not, that's another video also. But usually things are fine. So they say the walkthrough was fine, we're good to go. You go to closing. So what the title company does for closing is they take all of the funds that come from the buyer's down payment, maybe the earnest money deposit, and the wired money from the lender. It all goes into one account. And then they go through the contract and all the documents. They make sure that the seller actually owns the property, how much they owe on the property, any overdue bills, property taxes, all of those things. They kind of square all of that up, and that's part of that ALTA statement that I'll do another video on. And they make sure that the terms of the contract are carried out. And then they do the math. So there's the dollars in from the buyer and then the dollars out to the seller. And in Maryland, by law, the buyer has the right to choose the title company, but remember, they are a neutral third party. They're not part of the contract. They're not on anybody's side. Their job is basically to ensure that the stated terms of the contract are carried out, and that all the funds are dispersed accordingly, and that the person who's selling the house has clear title to the house, and that's why they have title insurance, which is again another video. But that's their job, to make sure that everyone is protected within the terms of the contract, and that all the funds go in and then go out as prescribed by the contract. So you'll sit at the table, the title company person, sometimes it's an attorney, sometimes it's a settlement officer. They sit at the head of the table. They usually have the buyers on one side and the sellers on the other, so that the paperwork can go in a loop much more efficiently. And for the seller, there's not as much to sign. You have to sign the deed and some other financial disclosures. There's tax documents and things like that. The buyer has all of that plus all the loan documents. So that can take a little bit longer. And sometimes the agents are there, sometimes the loan officers are there. Not always. It's not a requirement, but most like to be there. So they will sit down, they'll go over the ALTA, which is the line-by-line ledger sheet of where the money came in, all the expenses, and what's left at the end, or what the buyer owes. They'll go through any mortgage, any deed issues, the title insurance. There's correction clauses and things like that that they have you sign. But they'll go through all of that paperwork. And actually, when the buyer signs the deed, that is when the sale actually takes place. It's kind of a solemn moment. It's pretty exciting, but doesn't really get celebrated as much as it should. But once you're done, the title company, some of them will give you a paper copy, some will give you an electronic copy, most will give you both. They'll hand you a folder at closing, and then you're the owner. One of the other things kind of unofficially that will happen at closing is if the seller has any keys, remotes, all of those types of things, they'll hand them over to the buyer then. Garage codes, gate codes, anything that the buyer might need. When is trash day, when is recycling day, where are those things, kind of that exchange of information happens at closing as well. And then at that point, the buyer now owns the house. So the seller is required to be completely out, everything gone before closing that day. So hopefully that makes sense. And like I said, there's some other more intricate parts of that I'll do other videos on to really explain the breakdown of some of those things. But I wanted to explain the overall process to make it more understandable. So if you have any questions, let us know. You probably have our contact information, but if you don't, it should be down below. And have a great day.